I'm going to ask some real general open-ended questions, but the first one that I want to kick off for this panel is there anything different? Like, what are we seeing different in the last 12 to 18 months in the world of IR that is something that's fundamentally new that we haven't seen before that period of time? Like, is there any active change on this? So anybody can jump in. It's just, I'm not going to pick on people. It's not the McNeil hour. I'm gonna like, Alissa, it's your turn, go. But if you want to, go for it. So what is different in the last 18 months that we're seeing that is something that's trending and new?
I can jump in there.
Yeah, go for it, Troy.
What is old is
Yeah,
new again? Does that count?
Yeah,
I don't
right.
know if it's new or just kind of like it's like a cyclical thing, right? We go through these like ups and downs, right? Like I think with like EDR being so prevalent and good, at least compared to what it was when we all probably started doing IR, looking at like the perimeter, right? So we've
Mhm.
seen these O days, the VPN stuff with Avante over and over again. Although that's been going on for a few years now. The Palo Alto compromise, the ASA stuff,
Kaseya.
VPNs,
Mhm.
like the stuff that's on the edge that's basically being ignored or at least or maybe trusted. I don't know. Like there's
Neglected.
neglected, I guess, or yeah. So I mean that's definitely a shift or at least a trend that we've been seeing for the last several months.
Now, Troy, do you think that that's a new trend because there's always been vulnerabilities in those products, or do you think that the kind of the new part of it is a lot of those, whenever we're digging into it, have been exploited by nation states before we actually knew? Is that kind of what you're thinking is the newer
I
aspect of
think
it?
it's a mix of both, right? I think some of it has to do with the fact that EDR technology has gotten so good, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know that focus. I mean, just doing pen tests when I came to BHIS, and I do, you know, I teach a network forensics class, so I'm biased on network telemetry, but you know, doing pen tests and stuff like that, and once you get off an endpoint or get into the area where an EDR is not covered, a lot of customers they have no visibility
Yeah.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's difficult, especially if you're in a distributed kind of like you know, fashion where you have data centers or office sites that are satellite and you have hundreds of internet pops and stuff like that. It's very difficult. But I do think it's a mix of both.
All right. Alissa, what are your takes on it?
Perhaps it's something that has been nerving me more so now than in years past, but it's after an incident, the solution proposed is yet another technology or yet another platform to bring in,
Oh,
as opposed to going back and saying, what are we already paying for? What haven't we enabled? What haven't we, you know, created a baseline for? Why isn't our current security stack effective? And
yeah.
so it's just a knee-jerk reaction to find a new solution
Mhm.
instead of saying we had one, but we just didn't
Okay. So,
set it up
but you
correctly.
do think it is a knee-jerk reaction, though, right? Like you do think it is most of the time?
Well, what happens when you have a serious incident? You bring in a third party for surge
Oh
support
God.
or
Yeah.
for further investigative support, and typically it's proposed, well, if you only had this solution,
Yeah. It
like,
just so
so you
happens
already
that
have a
it
vendor.
just so happens that our company portfolio has all that you need, right? Like,
Yeah, no joke, no joke. Instead of asking the question, did we have security controls that we already
yeah,
owned that we could have just turned on,
right.
and that might not be immediately visible to the security team. Oftentimes when we have a product that has gone belly up, it's the security team that starts looking for user guides for
Yeah.
this particular device, that particular device, and I'm like, well, it had this enablement, but obviously we haven't enabled that. And you know, the IT folks, the infrastructure folks are like, but we never looked at it that way. We never considered enabling that particular security feature.
Yeah.
So I do think it's the easy way out is to say we need this technology. Maybe that's how people keep their jobs post incident. Is
Now, but
I got
do you think that that's partially driven by like management? Like, look, you don't, I don't know how to phrase this, but you don't want to go to management and be like, we effed up. It's much better to go to management and say, hey, what we really need is more money. Do
Yes.
you think that that's part of the problem, or do you think it's just people aren't aware of what the different things are that they could be doing with the technologies they have?
Yeah. I see a lot of thumbs up there.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
Easier to implement a new technology, I think, than the hard work of allocating engineer hours to enable a product that's already in place. Yeah, it's almost like admitting that you didn't do such a good job in deploying a technology. And no one, yeah, like you said, no one really wants to admit that it wasn't done right the first time. So
Well, I mean, I feel like I've seen that coming from like the layer of management above the technical people. Like I remember an incident that we did that they were highly instrumented, like a lot of people, for endpoint and phishing. And it turned out they had like, I don't know, something like 11,000 APIs exposed externally. And that's how they got popped, right? And instead of actually going through and looking at those APIs and the development team getting involved, they're like, management just, they want to put a WAF in front of it. So it'll be good, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Interesting what Alissa said about like looking for a new product or being told like, hey, there's new product versus looking at what you already have. And there's a lot of features and capabilities and a lot of tools that we already have, but are the organizations actually looking to, we used to use the term like to mature, like to increase the maturity of our tool sets, right? Enhance maturity on our tools. Well, what is the capabilities that exist that we're not using, or features, or all those kinds of things? Is there is there a level of customization that can be done as well, right? That's there. It's just you need also people. And I think it's really like the whole people, process, and technology, like that just summarizes it up. It's not just a tool, right? You got to have the people to look at that and ask that tool. When I say ask that tool, but ask the right questions and go back to the vendors. Like your effing tool says it does XYZ. We're only seeing X, maybe a little bit of Y and no Z. So what the hell is going on there, right? And she's managed to maturity is what we used to call it. Yeah.
Cool. So Mr. Johnson has been quiet, but I want to bring him in talking about training and stuff. I was training with him last week or 2 weeks ago. It seems so long yet so close.
Yes.
But, what's your take, sir?
Well, there's a couple of things. Real quick on Troy was talking about EDR. I think one of the technologies that's really kind of filling that gap too is we're moving into an XDR space. I think we're just going to go to a fully comprehensive detection and response modality. I like to also pull it out and say what we're seeing is some more government involvement, SEC guidelines for publicly held corporations and breach notifications. So as these things get higher publicity, I think United Healthcare didn't help. I think a number of high profile breaches where things were kind of opaque, I think is a good way to put it. We're starting to see the government start to pay a little bit more attention, and I think that's going to be one of the issues we're going to have to look at. The other is courts are now really looking at the concept of privilege between your corporate counsel, your attorney that engages, say, an external IR provider, or even your internal IR provider. So one of the caveats, or the takeaways, I should say, for this is, if you're having a purely technical discussion around incident response, it might be time to get into more of the operational and strategic, where you're starting to look at some of these issues and ensuring you're in sync with corporate counsel and potentially the executives of your organization, no matter how big or small, to make sure that you understand these issues. Because as I said, and I think the trend will continue upward of more and more scrutiny by regulatory bodies and government organizations.
I want to push on that a little bit, because I think that's an important point. Whenever we're doing IR tabletops, and we've been doing them with backdoors and breaches for a long time, it almost feels like we have to do two separate runs. Like we've got to do run one with the techs, and then we got to do run one with the management. And really what needs to be done, I feel, and I think everyone else would kind of agree, is we need them all in the same room together. But trying to get them all together like in the room together to work through these things is difficult. Have you had any luck in actually merging those two groups together into one tabletop step, kind of have these conversations? Because there seems to be this disdain for management, for the tech people. And I'm going to be honest, a lot of management has disdain for tech people. It's like water and oil, but they really, really, really need to be working together whenever we get to this. But it just feels like that policy, or rather those processes, break down when we need them the most.
So I look at what's going to go stale very quickly, and it's the technical side. And it is, I like to say that your technical team, say if it's a CERT or an internal team or even an external team, quarterly going through at least 20, 30 minutes of, this is our process for evidence acquisition, analysis, and reporting. How do we pivot into, XDR, EDR, network, host layer. But and then I agree with, there's a separate program, more of a crisis management than a kind of technical tabletop, where it's somebody posts online on XSS, hey, we've got access to this XYZ corporation, and we've had this for a month, and this is what we've done. How would you respond to that? And then, so you have essentially two separate work streams that you have to bring together, and that is the hard part, is to get 2 hours out of everybody's schedule, and that's why that annual kind of full comprehensive tabletop has to happen. But there are ways to break it out where you're really focused on that executive committee. We can just feed them the Reader's Digest version of technical. They can take that and run with it. And, the technical side is over here. The other with limited success I've run is a 2-day where we have one, if I'm on site, have the technical team one day, and then we take their output from that tabletop, we feed it into an executive crisis tabletop as kind of an option.
Cool. All right. So another question I want to ask everybody, and this is something anytime I've ever done IR tabletops, we inevitably come back to this question. I'm going to pick a number. Let's do 3. What are the 3 things that you wished every one of your IR customers had before you got there? What logs is it? What tool would it be? Is it an open bar at the organization that you're working the incident? What are the 3 things that you wish that every customer had, but they just don't seem to have? Alissa, I'll let you take this one first.
Oh, come on. I can't even think past asset inventory. I can't even think past asset inventory. I don't care about logging. Just tell me what's supposed to be in your environment. Yeah. I mean, and then we can talk about other things, but that's a showstopper. I'll pass for number 2.
All right, Derek, go ahead.
All right. So aside from easy access to a Fogo de Chao, I think what I would like, definitely logs. I mean, I can't, if there's been no attention paid to like actually retaining any data whatsoever, I wish everybody had set the default log size across their entire organization of the security log to more than the default 20 megabytes, and make it the gigabyte, just at a bare minimum. So that way, when they ask what happened yesterday, we can look on the domain controller logs past 2 hours or whatever. So that would be my one thing I really wish everybody had. Another thing, I'll pass to Troy, because I think he'd probably say what I'm about to say.
All right, Troy, go for it.
The one thing that we probably always ask for and is never there or updated is a network drawing.
Oh, yeah,
no, that's what I was going to say.
Asset inventory goes with all these things, right? But it is never, even if they have one, like the answer is, yeah, we have one, but we're working on getting an updated version. And then half the day goes by, or 2 or 3 days goes by, and then they give you the version they just did for you, like after the IR,
or they get it from networking, and it's like what's plugged into what.
We're waiting on the
VLAN, and
or you get it as like a Visio document from 2003.
And I was going to say, you probably need like 5 Cisco certs to like interpret half of the drawing, right? Because they got.
Do you really still have like a whole bunch of Solaris Spark systems? And you're like, oh, we're DoD, and you're like, oh,
then yeah. All right.
I don't need to know every single interface that the cables are connected to the switches. Yeah. Just show me like boxes, right? Just high level. Where's the internet? Where's the egress points? Where are your sensitive? Where are your servers in a different enclave? Like what is? Show me like a pseudo diagram, right? it doesn't have to be complicated. Just the general flows of data.
Yeah, that's actually, I say that in my class, like one of the first, like in the first section of that is like, I know it sounds really like cliche and campy, but you need a map. Like, if you don't have one, you need to make one.
So you're like the Dora the Explorer.
Exactly. That's what I say. You need to find your which way, right? Yeah. So sorry for those that don't have kids. Sorry.
All right, Gerry.
Identity. We see this with cloud adoption and hybrid models, and organizations just don't have a grasp on who's who in the zoo, as I like to say, is whose credentials, what's going on. These are one of the things I like to also point out is, malware has to run. It can hide, but it has to run, but it also has to do it under somebody's, whether it's a machine or an actual human being's credentials, it's got to do stuff. So having that understanding is crucial.
I got another one because, business email compromise is all the rage. Know what license level you have and what your logging limitations are. And please, for the love of God, consolidate your M365 logs into a central, offline place. So you have more than, probably the 90 days that you have, or even less in some circumstances, because that's a lot of where we see we don't have logs. And then we've watched a lot of business email compromises where we go back and look, and the compromise obviously happened before the logs rolled over. So,
yeah, but it also seems to me like with that, you still get that frustration from management. They're like, if we just hired a better firm, I'm sure that they could get us the logs that don't.
I've heard that. I've had a lawyer tell me that before.
Yeah.
Like, I can't tell you what's not there, dude. I'm sorry.
Somebody put in Discord, turn on UAL in 365. I think Microsoft made that change as a default turned on now.
I believe it is. Yeah.
Yeah. But it wasn't. Yeah. And then we've had IRs where that happened too, right?
Yeah.
Like we've go, turn that on.
Right. Any other things you wish that they had? By the way, I think
playing along Troy's, I could probably do this all day, right? So along Troy's line of thought of a network diagram, how about network logging? Because if you're going to ask me if data was exfiltrated and you only have endpoint instrumentation, it is a very difficult question to answer. And so
I want to pull on that thread a little bit, because we've dealt with this in our own SOC, right? With the idea of network logging versus endpoint logging. Derek, can you talk a little bit on the trials that you kind of go through with network logging, where it's by IP address and everything else is by hostname?
Yeah, so correlating network, you're referring to correlating network traffic with internal hosts, and that's still kind of a manual thing. It's very difficult to correlate, Zeek traffic to internal network traffic for sure. Usually that is kind of still a manual process. I'm not. We haven't figured out a way to do that internally easily. I mean, because there's a lot of overlap space between clients, right? So it can. That's
especially whenever they're in multiple locations and all of their manual pages are 192.168.2.
Right.
What the hell?
Or there's natting going on, or all kinds of crazy shit like that, right?
Yeah, but
visibility is up here and your network traffic is being natted.
Usually what I think that, my take on network logging, in general is, it's not as prevalent as as popular it was in the past because of traffic getting encrypted. Basically traffic's always encrypted, but you can still find out how much data was sent in most circumstances. And that's really the biggest question that we get that we never can answer without any kind of network telemetry is, was data exfiltrated?
Yeah, because if you're just seeing a handful of packets beaconing at a regular interval versus 2 terabytes leaving the environment.
Or if I just have endpoint data, what am I going to do, right? Yes, Sysmon has some information, fine, right? But I mean, it's unless you find staged compressed encrypted files, how do you know if data was exfiltrated? And so to me, that's the big question. And then more and more, to Troy's earlier point about external stuff, I feel that you should pay attention to what's happened externally too, because one of the recommendations that came out of the Palo Alto compromise was, how do you know if you're compromised? Well, they pointed to network telemetry on the outside. How many people are monitoring the outside? Right.
Dude, that's something from your lips to God's ears, right? That's something we talk about all the time.
And encrypted is one thing, but I mean, even that, if you read that Velexity blog, which is an excellent blog on that whole attack chain, they were watching just Python scripts being downloaded in the clear, right from the management interface of the firewall. So encryption is the thing, and there's some things we can do with encryption that's kind of fancy, but there's a lot of non-encrypted traffic, DNS and otherwise, that happens as well that you can see. And somebody in the Discord actually stole it. I was going to mention this. I talk about this all the time. I bring it up constantly, especially on client engagements, but also in my past experiences. NetFlow is a capability that if you're in an enterprise environment, you probably already have this technology. It's there. You just need to export those flows off. You don't have to pay other than just collecting them, right? And you can get both east-west and north-south visibility. I mean, I know you lose the context of what actually gets transferred, but least having some, and you already have probably the technology
It's
in house.
the best network monitoring that you didn't even know you
Yeah.
had,
You didn't even know
right?
you had. Yeah.
And so, and
So
to your point earlier, John, like you don't even really have to detect, just have it, like offload net flow to
yeah.
just let it sit there and then use it for an investigation. It's not like you have to alert on it or you have to put it in your sim and correlate it and make sense of it. Like that can come later. Just have it as a foundation. So that way, when management asks that question, you don't go, I don't know.
So I want to pivot from network. Alissa, I want to talk about endpoint because this is a topic near and dear to your heart. And I have a couple of questions that I want to ask. The first one, every effing time there's a new Windows operating system, right? Like we go from XP to Windows Vista to Windows 7 to Windows 10. There's inevitably you have these webcasts all over the place. Like what's new in this new version when we're talking about forensics and security? Is there anything like Windows 11 that you're looking at and you're like, oh, this is interesting, this is different, this is a problem, this is an improvement? Or is it really like some people are saying, it's just basically Windows 10 with a different skin, which was just Windows 7 with a different skin, which was just, going back and back and back? Or is there something fundamentally different that you see in Windows 11 that's improved or worse?
Oh yeah, it's interesting conversation, and I feel like I'm being led in to talk about recall.
I
Like,
no, hey,
I'm kind of
It's the
appalled.
elephant in the room.
I didn't, that word did not.
No, no.
You
No,
did this to yourself, remember?
my
So-
my entry into digital forensics incident response was my first job in this realm was as an employee investigator. So the thought, I mean, then sometimes we would roll out monitoring software akin to what recall is being described as, and it's terrifying to me. It's just terrifying to me. As someone who's worked at a lot of different places, I've always been of the mind like, oh, if only we could capture that moment in time where an employee becomes a disgruntled employee.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what the future is, just like being able to analyze the data and seeing that sentiment change. But I did want to say endpoint is really important, because if you're looking at outbound data, it's not a total void if you don't have visibility into the network. Think about the SHRM. Yeah, the SHRM database. Come on. The SHRM is capturing how much data is being sent based on process. Oh, wait, is that too nerdy?
No, go,
not at
nerd
all.
out.
Yeah,
Alissa, there's a whole bunch of people that
answers.
don't even know what that is. Could you tell them about it, please?
A system resource utilization monitor. And I think it's been around since Windows 8. So yeah, don't even have to talk about what's new and fancy on Windows 11. Windows 8. So if you're looking, and that's why I want to pivot and say, I think what we need to implement as part of a security team, if you don't have it already, is like a special ops team. You got the people that are like, this is our primary data source, but then you also need to identify those creative minds that are like, how can we find information of, how can you prove the data that's no longer here at some point in time was, right? And a special ops team, it could be an advanced incident response team, or just someone that you're not keeping time bound to a queue, that has the time to be a little bit more creative. I think that there's tremendous value there. That person will eventually find their way to the SHRM to show how many bytes have gone outbound based on this period of time, based on this process. So good stuff. But you have to have the skill set and training.
So I want to jump on something that you said, like a special team that's doing this stuff. So Gerry, whenever we were in Nebraska, because as I'm sure a lot of people are like, what the hell were they doing in Nebraska together? That's weird. But I was doing a lab with Atomic Red Team, and I walked by to go to the break room, and you had a lab with Atomic Red Team. So my question to you is, like, based on what Alissa was just talking about, all the stuff that we're talking about, I feel like so many organizations, they wait until they get punched in the face to come up with a plan. It's not like everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. It's in IT security, you get punched in the face, and at that point, you decide it's time to develop a plan against Mike Tyson. What do you? So can you riff a little bit about that? Because we talked about it at dinner, about how Atomic Red Team, adversarial emulation, like that really should be the other side of the coin from forensics and IR, right? So go ahead.
So to that, I have a quote on my whiteboard that I include, and it's, if you stay ready, you won't have to get ready. And I think that's a good way to start. So if you're not familiar with Atomic Red Team is a threat emulation tool provided by Red Canary, and it, I would say, closely resembles what actually happens on an endpoint from a threat actor perspective. It really started out as a detection validation tool, but the way that I've kind of incorporated it is come up with threat emulations for specific threat actors or specific techniques, run them through, and then go to all of the different evidence sources on the endpoint or network that you might be able to see it. So you can actually use, so for example, one of the most common techniques is a command script interpreter, where threat actor uses command prompts, PowerShell, whatever the case may be, to download, secondary payload, something like that. A lot of people, unless you've actually seen it, you don't essentially know what you're looking for. But you can run that on an endpoint, pull, say, the PowerShell logs, or pull in Sysmon if you have it, and actually see both sides of the equation. You can actually see both sides, what a threat actor is doing, and then what traces can you go look for. So it actually becomes one of these things where you can set this up, and in 10, 15 minutes, fire it off, collect some evidence, go through it, look through it, find out where it matches, and essentially you're getting both sides of that equation. And what it does is then you can go to Alyssa's standpoint and say, okay, I see it here. Where are some of the other data sources?
Yeah, where is it all
going?
Yeah.
And if you're dropping a test that has link files, do you know how to just process link files? And what you're going to do, and the other flip side, or I should say the other advantage to this, is you can take whomever's report, whether it's mTrends, whether it's Palo Alto, whether it's Red Canary's threat detection report, and say, these are the top 20 techniques. Maybe it's a good idea that I have workflows to go find where these things might be, and here are the emulations that I can run, so I can match these up and put little graphs or even screen captures of where to find this stuff. More that you can, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about that. So one of the things that I get asked about all the time, and I want to see if any of you guys are aware of, I'm sure that there's a number of them that exist, is you have the MITRE ATT&CK technique matrix, which is tied to Atomic Red Team, and you have like the top N techniques. I understand that, but is there anything that's like a heat map that you're aware of that basically is, when you're looking at the MITRE techniques, like which ones are the most utilized? You can do that top 20, that's great, but kind of like looking at it from that perspective, because I feel like a lot of organizations, I'll just give you an example. Post-exploitation, there's like 5 or 6 techniques that every adversary is going to do post-exploitation. There's 5 or 6. It's not millions of them. It's not hundreds of them. It's going to be like the top 5 or 6 things that they're going to do, whether you're going after Kerberoasting, whether you're doing an internal password spray. Hell, we still see in our pen test group policy preference files. It's like, you don't find it as much, but I guarantee you all my testers, like one of the first things they do is like, GPP, is that there? Because that's like an instant win, right? So whenever we're talking about trying to prepare for an incident, we're talking about what you're just talking about. Really, people need to focus on being in the place and checking the things instead of trying to boil the ocean for everything. So you mentioned 3 things really quickly. Are there any other resources that you all recommend based on what Gerry just said? Like to say, these are probably the top N things that we should be detecting.
I don't know if it's a top thing, but I'll bite on that one. I really wish people realized that in 2019, SSH.exe got introduced to Microsoft server and workstation environments, and that the power of SSH is incredible. Most people who haven't used Linux don't realize, right? If you're just a Windows administrator, you're like, oh great, I got SSH now. But I mean, we worked an incident where the threat actor essentially used SSH to send a reverse tunnel out, and that was their command and control, right? Yeah. And so the client was like, I didn't even know SSH was a thing, right? They were just Windows admins. And so I think back to what Alissa was saying about inventory, just knowing your environment, knowing what is possible in there which isn't an overnight thing. It's a journey, right?
And you could take that example as a benefit from us as defenders, as hunters, right? Because even though, yes, it could be abused, it could be one of those things where attacker, why bring a tool to the victim network when you can already utilize it?
You already use it.
We do know that there's attackers that actually, regardless, they bring their own tools anyways, right? Like So all attackers are different. Like just like people are all different, we prefer different things. And that's kind of like the interesting part of like tracking different adversaries, where we would say if an adversary does bring down their own version of an SSH tool to utilize, we're like, well, why would somebody be doing that when it's already built into Windows now? Right. So we can look at that as just examples of how we could be a little bit proactive or create some of those detections as well. Right.
So I want to push on that SSH thing just a little bit, because I really feel like when we're looking at the endpoint, we're looking at security, like there's good progress that's being made. Like looking at Sysmon and the fact that so many organizations are running it is a huge benefit, right? But then there's stuff that Microsoft does where you're just like, what? Okay, so SSH on Windows, I get it. I get why they did it. It should, like, SSH should be a thing, but it's like a gift to attackers. But that ain't it, right? Like if you're looking at it now, they're introducing Python and Excel, right? Like the guy that invented Python works for Microsoft, and they're working to bring Python in addition to PowerShell as a language, which is just another gift for pen testers and hackers everywhere. And if that's just it, you're like, okay, so that's it as well. Okay, no, Office Online is now going to start supporting JavaScript. So you have all of these things. See, this is what happens every time I bring these things up. On the Discord server, it's a breakdown of half the people are excited about this stuff. The other half of the people are like, what the F is Microsoft doing? Like, like shocked kitty and all of this. So with these things, like, do you see it as just job security? You're old enough, you're jaded enough, you've been
Oh
around enough. It
man,
just is what it
just
is. Or like, go ahead.
it's still the golden age of information security, at least for another couple of years, probably, right? But I mean, I guess I could take the same argument and be like, well, why want my endpoint protection like know the difference between my legit remote access software and the team viewer that I don't use, right? Because
Right.
I'll steal a quote from Jeff McJunkin. I'll probably make a good case that Viewer is the most widely used command and control like channel, right? I mean, you don't have to use malware, and I feel like a lot of the times, and folks I interact with in the information security community, like it's always malware, right? It's always sophisticated. It's always like like something that the endpoint controls would detect, but then also threat actors know that too, and so they do different stuff to get past it. I mean, Troy and I were on a red team back when we were pen testing a couple of years ago, and we didn't use malware at all, and we're wildly successful just living off the land, right? And
yeah, and customers really love it when you do that. Like, it gets back to how would we have detected this? It's like, once again, comes back, do you have the proper logs? Are you watching them?
Yeah.
And to Gerry's point earlier about identity, I mean, we talk about cloud, SaaS, and all the other cloud resources. There is no malware. Well, what malware is there, right? It's basically identity. It's once I get access to your creds, I could just do whatever I could do in the context of your permissions. And I mean, it's just a whole shift in that paradigm, right? And we can't forget about responding to endpoint compromises or network perimeter compromises. We can't forget about all that stuff because it's still prevalent. But then we have to, I mean, it's kind of like cybersecurity in general. If you've been around the game long enough, when technology increases, mobile, whatever it is, it's like we're always looked at as like we're the people we have to go to like figure these things out.
Yeah.
But Alissa made me chuckle earlier when a recall being basically like, was it Spectre, I think was what we used back in the day. I was like, oh my God, they're taking screenshots. What the? So just knowing what's coming down the pipe. I mean, that's another thing too, is just not like getting your head up out of the sand and like looking at things that are coming and what they might mean, like risk impact wise. Because a lot of the times too, again, like especially on the technical side, and Gerry was talking about this too, I think information security folks lose sight of, like the technical folks lose sight of the soft side of the house, right? And things that, because information security, I mean, risk to the business is important too, right? And so sometimes you have to pay attention to that.
So, I just got a question. By the way, if you're on Discord, since I'm doing this live, if you just like DM me in Discord at StrandJS, it'll show up on my watch. Palm Frond asked a question, said, I think you have a poli-sci background, John, which I do. Is there such thing, and I want to open this up to everybody else, is there a developer and vendor industrial complex that we need to be vigilant for? Kind of like Eisenhower's defense industrial complex. Is that something that we should be watching for? Is like the vendors kind of controlling everything? I mean, this gets into the weird conspiracy thing, which is true. But what are your thoughts on that? Because we started this out with the solution at the end of an incident is go buy more stuff.
Mhm.
And that seems like that's a symptom of the developer vendor industrial complex, like continuing to drive the narratives as far as what the solutions actually are.
I thought for a second you were gonna, like, what came to my mind when you said that was DNS over HTTPS. Like browsers basically being like, we'll handle the DNS for you, we'll handle
Yeah.
the privacy and secrecy for you.
You don't need to
Right?
worry.
Like
It's
you don't have to worry
fine.
about
Don't worry.
that. That's fine. I mean, yeah. I mean, you get that, like that narrative of it. It makes sense, especially from a personal device, like mobile device. But if you're securing an enterprise environment and you can't see DNS queries because they're being encrypted going out, like that cripples a lot of our response
Okay,
capability,
well,
right?
let me push on that a little bit more and kind of open it up to everybody too. Ads. Like one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about network. Like look at the network traffic. Ads are a train wreck when you're
Yeah.
looking at network traffic.
Yeah.
Content delivery networks and everything. And I always tell my classes, just disable them at the edge of your network. Just shut them down. But that fundamentally starts to break some things in organizations,
I
right?
was going to say,
Like
does the
if they're
internet
using
still work?
yeah,
Like-
YouTube videos, or like YouTube, and it's not because ads are intrinsic to it. It's because of the developer and vendor industrial complex wants those
Well,
sweet ads coming in, but
I
that's still
mean,
an attack vector.
that's baked into the secret sauce with surveillance capitalism, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like
Mhm.
that's basically how it all runs now. So good luck with the internet working. I mean, I don't disagree with you, but I mean, I think that
But the
that's
practicality, right?
it'd be tough. And
Right. Anyone else want to touch this? So
I mean, Microsoft convinced the whole world that going to cloud-based email was the way to go.
Yeah.
And I mean,
not just cloud-based email, but their cloud-based
Their
email.
yeah.
and I mean,
okay, let's okay. So I want to go around the horn on this.
okay.
Was that a bad idea? Alyssa, do you think that organizations moving to cloud-based email was a good thing or a bad thing, right? I mean, do we still want to have on-prem exchange, or are there some things where like, no, this makes sense. Going to cloud-based email was probably the right call. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Agreed. I think we're better off not
Yeah.
necessarily managing it ourselves.
We didn't do well.
Yeah, no,
I mean, no one is going to disagree with that statement at all, right? But on the other hand, last year Microsoft had a pretty serious flaw where
Yep.
you know that people that threat actors were getting access to tenants with basically like essentially as a cloud zero day, right? And so it's I don't know. I kind of look at it as, is there any real good solution? Should we just get rid of email? Like, I mean, I think I'd be fine with no
I think it
email.
depends on the
It's all
actual like the company. If you're a small to medium company,
Yeah.
and like hosting an on-prem exchange or doing any of that stuff, probably better to go to something like Microsoft. But if you're a large company that's been doing stuff and like, I mean, I don't know, to Derek's point, the stuff that happened last summer with Microsoft, for 30 days, those MSA signing keys were being used to access any tenant in 365, including GovSpace. That scares the shit out of me.
Yeah,
Like,
but
And
here's
they
the
still
deal.
haven't really
Wait.
gone through
I-
with the promise of E3 level logging, right?
well, that
Like,
was the
I mean,
point. Like, some
I want to
licenses-
bring
yeah.
bring Gerry on this because him and I talked about it. But but one of the things that I fundamentally believe is I don't care. I don't care how bad it was. I don't care that there was this flaw in Microsoft. If I'm running a company, the only thing I care about is the narrative of the story when that breach happens.
it was
Because all of
Microsoft's
those
fault.
organizations that got compromised, every single one of them could point the finger at Microsoft, and it was just force majeure. It was an act of God.
Mhm.
Whereas
Mhm.
if it was an on-prem exchange, I don't care how big the company is, if you run your own on-prem exchange and something like that happens, then that's your fault. And that's kind of my take, and that's a horrible take, right? That's like I might be getting pointy hair like a Dilbert cartoon, and I'm like, oh, I don't need to know threats and vulnerabilities because I make risk-based decisions because
Yeah.
I'm now in management. But seriously, like I love the fact with the cloud that we can totally point the figure and be like, it was Kaseya.
Mhm.
That's powerful. So, Gerry, what's your take on it?
Well, I'm going to just kind of start and say I think we really can't discount 2020 and what actually went on in 2020, because I think we're going to be feeling these effects in terms of a lot of the things that were done, specifically because we don't have office spaces the way that we do. You drive by any corporate office park and see how much corporate real estate is for lease.
Vacant. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that drove that literally, we had this nice incline of adoption, and then 2020 hits, and then it's like, yeah, we're going straight up. What I would agree is that if there's it's very easy to point the fingers at your SaaS provider or your IaaS provider for the breach, and it's a very convenient way for us to kind of offload the legal liability. But one of the things I would say is that it does also really highlight. We really didn't really think about this, kind of one of those 18-month kind of things. The supply chain side of it, the third party.
Mhm.
You know, we had TJX, and and Target.
Ooh,
we still didn't kind of.
Gonzalez, old school. Okay.
Yeah, we really didn't realize. Okay, what's service providers? Or do we really? No, we're good. But now it's that's a whole nother, when you're talking outside of IR and into the risk management space. That's a whole. Who are you using? And it goes to another point that someone earlier made, I forget who, about an inventory. Do you even know what apps you have on loaded?
Okay, so let's grab that question, because we're talking about cloud, right?
Yeah.
And I think we can all pretty much agree that COVID was a conspiracy cooked up in a lab in China by the VPN companies. I think they're the ones, and Zoom. They got together, VPN companies and Zoom, and they won COVID. And we can go beyond. Oh yeah, so let's talk about inventory, because we started with inventory. We talked about it in the middle. I want to bring it back to the end of inventory. Everyone talks about inventory, but cloud inventory is flipping hard.
Oh,
it is incredibly difficult. Now, I know people talk about Office 365. Okay, fine, that's great. But what about all the other third-party cloud apps that various teams are using for marketing, for development, for HR, for all of these different things? That type of inventory, especially when we're looking at breaches, we're looking at risk profiles as far as vulnerability space. We hear about these breaches. Snowflake was the one that was a couple of weeks ago, right? We have these things coming up, and I know that most tech people were like, Snowflake? What the hell is Snowflake? We don't have that. And then they come to find out that they were actually hit. How the hell do you inventory for that? Like, I have some ideas, but I want to kick it out to everybody, because when you're working an incident and we want a good inventory, great. We got network maps, we have IP addresses, we have host names. And then you go, what are the cloud, like SaaS, AS, PaaS, AS, whatever, different as a service that you're using out there? Trying to get your arms around that is really, really hard, because there's so many credit cards of corporations that are flying all over the place.
Yeah, I think
that's it. Yeah.
If you're just getting started in that journey, I'd go talk to accounting first. What are we paying for? Like,
what has been expensed in the last 90
but even
days.
Accounting, I've got accounting is right next door on the other side of this wall. Going to accounting, being like, we would like to know all the cloud provider software packages that we're running at this company. Accounting is just going to be like, F you. I have no idea.
You know what you're talking about.
Let me go ask
cybersecurity. Yeah, you're going to have to work with them, not just ask them questions.
Oh, absolutely. You're going to have to scroll through it. And that's horrifying too, going through accounting and seeing what's expense. It's like golf. You expense what?
Bourbon. When did John say we could expense bourbon?
What's this bourbon? That's the IR team.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know. So other than accounting, are there any other ways? Like going back to Zeek, I think Zeek logs are great.
Yeah.
You can see what domains are being accessed, but that's still work. I don't think there's any easy way. There might be. I don't know. Does anybody have any ideas? It's like, what is the easy button for this?
That's why it's still the golden age of information security. There's not an easy button.
I mean, audit your billing, right? Like, because sometimes like that'll show up like, why am I getting billed for whatever XYZ? Because a lot of those cloud resources are that way, right? A lot of them are not free. So I mean, I guess I would start there. That and contracts, looking at contracts to see if there's any language that specifies whatever we're buying is also being handled by a third party or something like that.
So one of the things that we implemented here that I think works, and we're a small company, right? We're not that big. But one of the things that we implemented was if you buy anything, it has to be acquired by the systems team. And the systems team has admin level access that they keep in some type of password manager, right? So we to get our arms around this, we basically like systems has this, and they basically will pay for it. It gets approved by accounting and management. And then systems has like this running total of all of the different software that we have. But like bring your own devices. I guess we could call it bring your own ass, where people are bringing in their like software as a service, where they're just paying for it with their own credit card.
Yeah.
And they're running those things. Do you
That's
see
what
that
I worry
a lot?
about with large language model access.
Yeah.
Well, not worry
Yeah.
about. That's one of the things that like I did ask our accounting, and they were like, "Wait, what are you talking about?"
Yeah.
So,
Well, John approved it. It's fine.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. But I mean, I think that even that's not like perfect. It's better, but I don't know that there is like one good solution.
Okay. We're coming up on the top of the hour. I think we're at the end of our session coming up here just quickly, but I want to kind of leave people with something like what they can do. So each of you, I want you to recommend for all the people that are listening, give them one thing they can do next week that they're going to be better whenever they get into an incident that's going to improve them. What is the one thing that they can do to start them down that path that you wish that all these people knew and that they understood? So Gerry, I'll start with you because you're in that magic quadrant to the right of me. What is the one thing you wish people would do next week to just make themselves better?
So the first thing is sit down and look at your incident response framework. That's maybe your plan, your workflows, your playbooks, and really kind of the best way to put it is think of the worst case scenario and would these be effective in that? And that's just a very quick sit down with a cup of coffee over 45 minutes to an hour and really kind of deep dive, because that's going to be the foundation moving forward.
So for the 70% of the people that are going to try to take your advice and realize they don't have a plan at all, are there any templates that you would recommend once they find out after their morning coffee and watching this? They're like, we have no effing plan. Let's get punched in the face, then develop a plan. So what are some templates and some places you would recommend them to go?
I'm gonna be the one to be like, okay, ChatGPT, I need an instant response plan for a 50-person or 100-person organization.
We don't
actually pretty good.
shame here.
I mean, it's better than nothing.
Yeah,
So-
or Copilot, whatever your flavor is your the quote that I really like is plans are useless, but the planning process
is indispensable. Planning is
it
indispensable.
Is Dwight Eisenhower. It is literally that if you go through that process and if you have nothing, get a cup of coffee. The solution to everything is coffee, more coffee, and then really start working through that process. And if it is strictly you have nothing on paper, ChatGPT start getting stuff together, and there's YouTube videos, there's templates out there, there's 3,000 different types of templates. It's a good, I like ChatGPT as a recommendation because it gets you started.
Fantastic. All right, Alissa, your turn. One thing that people can do to just make them even better people. I don't know. Go pet a cat or something.
Yeah,
but what do you got, Alissa?
Most folks know, we're going to grow a wish list. So when we get hit with some critical incident, we already have what we want to spend money on.
You're saying create the Christmas wish list now?
No, actually, I'm going to add to that wish list because yes, everyone has their technology or, we need 5 more people to add to the team. But oftentimes through the lens of an internal security team, a lot of the conversation thus far has been, contractor or consultant going in and helping the customers who don't have what's needed. But I'll tell you, a lot of internal teams are fighting political battles, such as, can we please get that data source coming into our SIM? Can we please get that data source? Can we please gain access to like JAMF, so we can see or gain some visibility into Mac? So we need to build a wish list of access where we've run into political obstacles. No one's going to give us access to like cloud data. It's not coming into our SIM. So when an incident hits, we now have some levers. We have some anecdotal stories to say, this happened because we didn't have access or visibility into that area of the environment. And now we have, say, yet another bit of political weight to justify. Yeah. And if you haven't heard that story, I think it's pretty common.
I like how both of these start developing a plan, like some form of a plan, or there's narratives or there's a justification. All right, Troy, what is your one thing that you wish people would do to make themselves better?
I would just say, take a look at your log telemetry, how it exists today, your tools, your suites, your stack. Just look at it. Look at it good. Look at it to see is it configured correctly? Is it telling me the things it needs to tell me? Is it acting as it's supposed to act, as I expected to act? Don't assume any of your tools are working the way there's no push button solutions out there. I'm sorry. You have to make sure, look at your stuff. make sure it's capturing what it needs to be capturing, and then go a little bit further too. Like, what is the additional? We already talked about what is the additional features and capabilities in the tools in the stack that I already have that we could additionally leverage to get the more the biggest bang from our buck out of this.
All right, Derek.
I think that to make your life better, I think I would say don't be afraid of AI and large language models and start to use them. Because I see a lot of people being very afraid of them, and I don't know that at this point there's a reason to be afraid, but more on like, the incident response side of the house. Don't ignore the external surface area of your environment, and make sure you know exactly what is facing the internet, where that data goes, and what potential risks there may be. So.
Very cool. And mine is going to be simple. Incidents are incredibly stressful. And the ability to chill the F out is, for many people, a learned behavior. Go to a park bench somewhere, sit down, and try to practice chilling the F out.
Don't panic.
Don't panic. And for a lot of people, not panicking is a skill. It is something that needs to be learned, and practice that like you would your technical skills before the incident ever occurs. And this is just good life lessons. But whenever incidents happen, as soon as you start panicking, your brain shuts off, and you kind of need that thing while you're working through an incident. So practice letting things go. Practice trying to be calm. Practice trying to think clearly in stressful situations, and things will be better.